Hi, welcome back again. Today we're going to cover the different types of host scaling in host pools in Fabrics. So the first thing you want to do is select your company. We're going to go to our test company. You're going to click on the Assets tab, and it will take you by default to the host pools. We're going to click on our host pool, test host pool 1, and bring up the features. And we have a number of different scaling features that are all listed here. So the first one we're going to talk about is host instance scaling. So host instance scaling is the basic core scaling type. And this is scaling out and in. So Fabrics, based on the membership of your AVD group, WVD group, will calculate with the combination of what your current max session limit is, which can also be optimized in other videos, and it will scale the number of instances you have in the host pool in or out. So by enabling instance scaling, you're telling Fabrics that, hey, if you see this right here, we currently have this set to 10, and there's 22 users in the host pool, so if I divide 22 by 10, that means we should effectively have 3 machines available for instance scaling. So if I cancel out of that and go to my hosts, you see I have 3 hosts available. One of them is not cloud created because I just changed that value from 20 to 10, which I can show you in the logs because I wanted to show you Fabrics taking action to change those number of instances. So we go into the logs, you can see that here I changed the max session limit at 955, and I changed it to 10. Its previous value was 20, which we can view in the audit logs. Should be 955. 955. So here's the max session limit value change in the logs. It shows, okay, the original value is 20, we changed it to 10. So at 20 there were 2 hosts, 22 divided by 20 gives you 2, rounded up, and we changed it to 10, that gives us 3. So when you change that, what happens is, the next time Fabrics does an analysis of the host pool, it sees that it needs to create a host. So you'll have it do all of the steps here, and you can see all of the responses from Azure that result in starting the creation of a host, where you get confirmation from Azure that, okay, I'm creating a host for you now. So that's one type of scaling. We go back to our assets page, click on host pools. Now we're going to show you some different types of scaling. So that's instance scaling. We also have what we call size scaling, and this is in and out instance. Size scaling is up and down. So if you click here, you can see we don't have it enabled for this host pool. It shows you again what the current number of max session limits is. Size scaling is this idea that you've created hosts at a specific size. So in our instance, if we go look at our host size that we have right now, edit the pencil, and go to creation for a host. Here we're using a D2ASV4. If, say, the number of hosts that was allowed to be on that machine by your max session limit settings kept decreasing to the point that you get 3 machines, 4 machines, 5 machines, 6 machines. Once you get to this maximum number, if this feature is enabled, it would say, okay, you've reached 11 hosts, you have size scaling enabled. I don't want there to be more than 10 hosts. So in the shutdown period of time overnight, what Fabrics will do, if this is enabled, is increase all of the hosts to the next bigger size, and then it will change the max session limit to add twice as many users, like whatever the current max session limit. If it's scaling it up, it's going to double the number of users. And reset the number of hosts, so it'll delete some of the hosts. Inversely, if it scales it down and it reaches whatever your lower limit is, and this could be 2 or it could be 4, whatever you want your lowest limit to be, when it reaches that, it's going to scale it down and then add back to the max session limit and add new machines back to the host pool. The main reason for size scaling is, one, so you don't get sprawl, so you don't end up with 50 hosts in your host pool with 2 users on them or something like that. Or also just for maintenance purposes. If you have 50 hosts in a host pool, for instance, and you have a problem and you need to hotfix them, hotfixing 50 hosts is a lot more work, even though we have some tools to help automate that. But if you have, say, between 3 and 10 hosts, it's a much simpler thing to do. So a lot of times it's just for simplicity of the interface. You have less hosts you have in your interface, you have less host users can be on, but also to keep any patches that need to be done where you can't kick everybody out, like you need to hotfix something, say during the middle of a workday, that it makes it much easier to accomplish. So that's host size scaling. We're going to go next to what we call user density scaling. No, we don't want to change those. So instance scaling is the base type of scaling. User density scaling is an optional scaling that you can enable, which it looks at the actual consumption patterns of your host pool. And instead of, say, during the middle of the day, maybe 1 out of every 2 users is logged in, instead of just having half of the machines turned off, effectively what user density will do is it'll say, hey, whatever your consumption is that's discerned out of a machine learning model that consumes your metrics and your threshold, and the threshold is kind of like a safety factor. So say you have 100 users, you have 10 hosts, and there's 10 users on each host, and only half of them are logged in. So you basically would need 5 machines running to support that. If you enable user density, if you don't enable user density, 5 of those machines will just be turned off at that point in time. If you enable user density, half of those machines need to be on. You've added a 20% threshold, so it'll make sure 7 of those machines are created. 2 of them will still be turned off because you're only consuming actively 5 of them, but the other 3 machines will be destroyed. And the reason for doing this is you're still paying for the hard disks of a virtual machine at any point in time. So by destroying the machines, each hard disk for, say, a Windows 11 machines may be 128 gigs. So in our example where we destroyed 3, 128 times 3 is roughly 360 gigabytes, or a third of a terabyte, that you're then releasing and not paying for. So during the day you can see a kind of like, hey, that's interesting, I've saved 360 terabytes of data cost in the middle of the day. But the real cost comes as you go to ramp down the host pool and go into overnight. As the host pool ramps down and users log off, the number of hosts actually created will drop from, you know, the 7 down to, and it can get as low in our example as 2. And then it'll stay that way all night long. So if you think about that, you now have 8 hard disks which are removed, which is over a terabyte. So for more than half of the day, probably you're removing a terabyte of storage that you no longer have to pay for. So user density scaling is a little more aggressive way, and it predictively, with machine learning, creates and destroys machines. And then the last one we're going to talk about is spot scaling, and this can be layered. Yes, we do want to save those. With user density. So spot scaling does not apply unless you're using user density. And when you enable spot scaling, what you're basically telling it is, okay, once I get over 85% of all the machines in my host pool, I want you to use spot instances. So if we go back to our previous example where we had 100 users with 10 hosts, and say we get user density high enough level that all 10 machines are going to be created. When you go from the 8th machine in this case to the 9th machine, you've exceeded this spot instance threshold. So the 9th and 10th machines would be created as spot instances. Now, creating something as a spot instance has a risk. It can be called back without any warning. So there is a possibility that any users that get put onto those machines just get kicked off. Now, it doesn't mean they can't log right back in and get right back to work on another machine. So it's kind of a decision that you need to make, whether the savings and spot instances ends up being, somewhere near 10 cents on a dollar for the runtime, depending on whatever the current cost is for spot. That can vary. But then the runtime of those machines is at a supremely discounted price as well. So those are the 4 types of scaling that we have enabled for Azure host pools with Fabrics. Click Save and close that out, and we'll see you again later.